Well, the Donald Trump 5 for 5 last night, sweeping the Northeast and getting closer to the nomination. He says he's inevitable, but will the GOP, will the party agree?
Well, former presidential candidate turned Trump supporter, Dr. Carson joins us now to answer that question. Good morning, Dr. Carson.
Good morning.
All right, so what does this say? What happened yesterday? What does it say about the election going forward?
Well, it says that the people themselves in the conservative movement have a much better sense of how to save the party and how to save the country than the pundits and the political establishment. And interestingly enough, a few weeks ago they were all saying, well, brokered convention, a contested convention, it's inevitable. But I think the people have discovered that it doesn't have to go that route. And that's why they're flocking in droves to the Trump campaign, because they know what will happen if we have a contested convention. They know that the enthusiasm will disappear, the party will be fractured, we'll not only lose the presidency, but the Senate, and the Supreme Court will shift significantly. And you think some of the stuff coming out of the Supreme Court now is wacky. Wait until you put a few more progressives on there. Well, we will not recognize this country.
Well, I tell you what, Donald Trump last week had a good week here in New York State. He wound up with 60.4%. Last night in Delaware, he wound up with 61%, and in Rhode Island, 64%. Doctor, what do you make of this alliance between Ted Cruz and John Kasich?
Well, Ted Cruz and John Kasich, I think both are thinking that somehow the situation can be manipulated and they can become the nominee. But what they're thinking about are themselves and their ambition. They need to put that aside, and they need to think about the country, the future, and recognize that if they fracture the Republican Party and they fracture the conservative vote, right, and they deny Donald Trump the nomination, they are basically handing it over to Hillary or a Hillary substitute. That's not going to be good. They need to think about their children. They need to think about their grandchildren. They need to think about the overall scheme. And right, they need to know that they can still have a future, but they need to play this thing for the country, not for themselves.
Dr. Carson, what do you say about some conservative columnists writing that the end of Reaganism and conservatism is over if Donald Trump gets the nomination because of his stand on Iraq, Social Security staying exactly the way it is, his stand on the bathrooms in North Carolina, on NATO. A lot of people on the right are getting panicky that Donald Trump will have the nomination and blow up the party and their tenants for good. What's your reaction?
My reaction is that Donald Trump is a much more reasonable person than they think he is. And that they will find that he's not an ideologue and that he is actually quite willing to listen to reason. And as long as there are people who are reasoning with him, we're going to make very good progress. No one, if you go back and you look at the things that people have said who've been running for office over the years, you'll find very little correlation between what they're saying and what actually happens.
Interesting analysis in this post-game show to the big Sella primary. Dr. Ben Carson joining us from West Palm Beach, Florida. Doctor, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Carson.